Have you ever been told no so many times that you started to wonder if everyone else was right? Have you ever felt like every door you knocked on was slammed in your face? Not because you weren't good enough, but because you just didn't fit the mold? If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you'd never make it, this story is for you. And if you know someone who's fighting for their chance, share this with them, because sometimes the ones who are rejected the most are the ones who change everything. The first time, Evie Tran sat in the cockpit of a fighter jet. She was 12 years old. Her father, a retired pilot, had taken her to the base museum, where she'd climbed into the battered trainer's seat, gripped a stick, and looked through the scratched glass at the endless blue sky. In that moment, she knew absolutely, without a doubt, that she was born to fly. But the world didn't see it that way. By the time she was 22, Evie had applied to every squadron in the Air Force. She had the grades, the hours, the recommendations. But every application came back the same. Thank you for your interest. We regret to inform you. Sometimes the rejection was polite. We're looking for a different profile. Sometimes it was blunt. You're not what we're looking for. And sometimes it was just cruel. Try something less demanding. Evie was short, wiry, and Vietnamese American in a world where most pilots still looked like the posters from decades past. She was quiet, intense, and stubborn as hell. She didn't play golf with the brass, didn't have a famous last name, didn't fit the image of the ace. But she never stopped dreaming. Her friends told her to give up. Her mother begged her to apply to med school. Even her father, who taught her everything about flying, grew quiet when the letters kept coming. But Evie refused to quit. She trained harder, flew longer, memorized every manual, every emergency checklist, every inch of every aircraft she could get her hands on. She volunteered for the toughest assignments, night shifts at the airfield, maintenance runs in the freezing rain, simulator marathons that left her dizzy and exhausted. She watched as classmates were accepted into squadrons, pinned with wings, celebrated in photos that filled her newsfeed. She congratulated them, smiled for the cameras, and went home to her tiny apartment to study flight logs by herself. The last squadron on her list was the 214th, known as the Ghosts. They were the most notorious, the most demanding, the squadron that took the best and broke the rest. Their CO, Colonel Maddox, was a legend with a reputation for chewing up rookies and spitting them out. Evie sent her application anyway. Weeks passed. No reply. She started to accept that maybe, just maybe, this was the end of the road. Maybe she'd never wear the wings. Maybe she'd never fly for real. Then, one rainy morning, her phone buzzed. A single line. Report to 214th Airfield. 600. Bring your gear. Evie didn't sleep that night. She packed and repacked her flight bag, checked her logbook, polished her boots. She drove to the airfield in the dark, heart pounding, hands sweating on the wheel. The base was a blur of activity jets roaring down the runway, mechanics shouting over the rain, officers striding through puddles with purpose. Evie found the squadron office, knocked, and stepped inside. Colonel Maddox looked up from his desk. He was older than she expected, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "You Tran?" he asked, voice flat. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment. "You know how many times you've been rejected?" Evie swallowed. "All of them, sir." He almost smiled. "And you still showed up?" She nodded. "I don't know how to quit, sir." He tossed a set of keys across the desk. "There's a trainer on the tarmac. Preflight in 15. If you're not ready, don't bother coming back." Evie ran through the rain, heart hammering, boots splashing through puddles. She reached the old trainer, climbed into the cockpit, and began her checks. Every switch, every lever, every gauge, she knew them all by heart. Maddox watched from the tower, arms crossed. She could feel his eyes on her as she finished the checklist, signaled for clearance, and taxied to the runway. Takeoff was smooth. The sky opened up, gray and wild, clouds swirling like giants. Evie pushed the jet through maneuvers, climbs, rolls, dives, her hands steady, her mind focused. She felt alive, more herself than she'd ever been on the ground. When she landed, Maddox was waiting. He didn't say a word, just nodded once. Be here tomorrow. 500. Don't be late. Evie walked back to her car in the rain, soaked and shivering, but grinning so wide her cheeks hurt. For the first time, the door hadn't closed. For the first time, she was in. But she had no idea what was waiting for her, because the ghosts weren't just any squadron. They were about to fly the most dangerous mission of the war, a mission no one was expected to survive. And when it was over, only one pilot would make it back. Asterisk. The next morning, Evie was on the tarmac before dawn, breath steaming in the cold, boots planted at the edge of the runway. The 214th T-8's hangar was alive with the metallic clang of tools, the hiss of hydraulics, and the low, rumbling laughter of pilots who'd seen more combat than most people saw birthdays. She watched them from a distance tall, broad-shouldered men and women in battered flight suits, their patches faded, their eyes sharp. They moved with an easy confidence, joking and ribbing each other, but Evie could feel the undercurrent. These were survivors, and she was an outsider. Colonel Maddox arrived at 0500 sharp, his voice slicing through the morning haze. All right, ghosts, listen up. We've got a new candidate. Tran, step forward. Evie did, heart pounding. Maddox looked her up and down. You want to fly with us, you have to prove you belong. Today's your chance. You'll fly with Lieutenant Vega on patrol. Vega, she's yours. Vega was a legend in the squadron tall, with a scar running down his cheek and a reputation for pushing jets and people to their limits. He gave Evie a once-over, then jerked his head toward the flight line. Let's go, rookie. They suited, up in silence. Evie checked her helmet, gloves, and G-suit, then followed Vega to a pair of aging but deadly F-16s. She ran through her pre-flight, nerves taut as wires, then climbed into the cockpit. The canopy closed, sealing her in with the scent of oil, metal, and adrenaline. Vega's voice crackled in her headset. Stay close, don't get fancy, and don't embarrass me. Yes, sir, Evie replied, forcing her voice steady. The engines roared to life, and the jets taxied to the runway. Evie's hands shook as she gripped the stick, but as the afterburners kicked in and the ground fell away, everything else faded. She was flying, truly flying at the edge of the world. They climbed into the clouds, Vega leading, Evie tucked tight on his wing. The radio was alive with chatter squadron call signs, weather updates. A warning of enemy radar sweeps to the north. Vega tested her early. Brake left, hard, now. Evie yanked the stick, feeling the G's press her into the seat. She rolled, dove, and pulled up just behind Vega, matching his moves. He pushed harder, steep climbs, barrel rolls, snap turns. Evie stayed with him, sweat pouring down her back. Teeth clenched. After 20 brutal minutes, Vega's voice came over the radio, grudgingly impressed. Not bad, rookie. Let's see how you handle the real thing. A warning light blinked. Bandits, 2 o'clock low. Evie's heart leapt. This was no drill. Vega's voice was all business. Stay tight. Weapons cold unless I say otherwise. 2 enemy jets flashed by, banking hard. Vega called maneuvers. Evie mirrored him, adrenaline surging. The enemy pilots probed, tested, then peeled off, vanishing into the clouds. Vega exhaled. You kept your head. That's more than most. They returned to base, landing in tandem. The squadron watched as they taxied in. Vega climbed out, nodded to Maddox. She can fly, Maddox grunted. We'll see if she can last. The next weeks were a blur of drills, briefings, and endless tests. Evie flew dawn patrols, night intercepts, simulated dogfights. She studied maps, weather patterns, enemy tactics. She listened more than she spoke, learning the squadron's rhythms, the unspoken rules. Some pilots ignored her. Others tested her with pranks, switching her helmet, hiding her flight bag, leaving cryptic notes in her locker. She took it all in stride, refusing to let them see her flinch. Vega became her reluctant mentor, pushing her harder every day. You're fast, but you overthink. Trust your gut. Out here, a second's hesitation can get you killed. Evie nodded. Absorbing every lesson, she found allies in unexpected places. Chief Ramirez, the grizzled crew chief, who showed her how to coax an extra knot of speed from a tired engine. Lieutenant Harper, the only other woman in the squadron, who shared coffee and quiet encouragement. And Sergeant Kim, the radar operator who slipped her extra intel before every mission. But the real test came in the air. One night, during a routine patrol, Evie and Vega were scrambled to intercept an unidentified contact. The sky was black, the moon a thin crescent. As they closed in, the radar lit up 3 enemy fighters, moving fast. Vega's voice was tight. Weapons hot. Stay sharp. The dogfight was chaos missiles streaking, flares blooming, jets twisting through the darkness. Evie's training took over. She dodged a missile by inches, locked onto a target, and fired. The enemy jet exploded in a burst of flame. Vega took down another, but the third enemy scored a hit on his tail. I'm leaking fuel, he shouted. Cover me. Evie swung behind the enemy, forcing them to break off. She stayed with Vega, guiding him back to base, her own jet riddled with shrapnel. They landed hard, emergency crews rushing in. Vega climbed out, blood on his face, but alive. He looked at Evie, eyes wide. You saved my ass, rookie. Word spread through the squadron. The rookie had held her own and saved a legend. The mission no one wanted. The next morning, Maddox called the squadron together. His face was grim. Command has a job for us. Deep strike, enemy territory. High risk, low chance of return. But if we don't do it, the whole front could collapse. He looked at each pilot in turn. I won't order anyone to go. Volunteers only. One by one, the ghosts stepped forward. Vega, Harper, Kim. Even Evie, heart pounding, raised her hand. Maddox nodded. Briefing at 1800. Get your affairs in order. The mood in the hangar was somber. Pilots wrote letters home, checked their gear, shared quiet jokes. Evie sat with Harper, staring at the mission map. You scared? Harper asked. Evie nodded. Terrified. Harper smiled. Good. Means you'll be careful. That night, Evie called her father. She told him about the mission, the risks, the chance she might not come back. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, I'm proud of you, Evie. Not because you're flying, but because you never gave up. She hung up, tears in her eyes, and went to the briefing. The squadron gathered in the ready room. Maddox at the front. He outlined the plan. Low-level ingress. Hit the enemy supply depot. Exfiltrate before dawn. Enemy radar was thick. SAM sites everywhere. Air cover uncertain. Most of you won't make it, Maddox said, voice flat. But if you do, you'll have saved thousands of lives. He looked at Evie. You earned your place here. Whatever happens, you're one of us. The pilots filed out, each lost in their own thoughts. Evie sat alone, staring at her flight suit, her helmet, her father's old flight patch sewn inside. She didn't sleep. She watched the stars through the barracks window. Heart pounding, mind racing. At dawn, she suited up, joined the others on the tarmac. The jets gleamed in the early light, engines rumbling, Ground crews moving with practiced urgency. Max gave the signal. Mount up. Time to fly. Evie climbed into her cockpit, hands steady, eyes clear. She looked at her squadron, her family, and nodded. The mission was on. The pre-dawn air was heavy with anticipation and the faint scent of jet fuel. The tarmac shimmered under the floodlights as the Ghosts assembled for the final checks. Evie moved through the ritual with calm precision. Helmet, oxygen mask, flight suit, sidearm, lucky patch from her father tucked inside her vest. Around her, the squadron was all business, but the usual banter was gone. Even Vega was silent, his jaw clenched as he reviewed the mission brief one last time. The mission was simple on paper, impossible in practice. Fly deep into enemy territory. Destroy the supply depot fueling the enemy's advance, and make it out alive. The route was a gauntlet: SAM sites, radar nests, enemy patrols, and the ever-present risk of mechanical failure. Command called it a calculated risk. The Ghosts called it a suicide run. Evie's hands were steady as she climbed into her F-16. The cockpit felt smaller than usual, the weight of what was coming pressing down on her shoulders. She checked her instruments, ran through the preflight, and listened to the comms as each pilot called in, one by one. Ghost 1, ready. Ghost 2, ready. Ghost 3, ready. Ghost 4, ready. Ghost 5, ready. Evie's turn. Ghost 6, ready. Colonel Maddox's voice crackled over the radio. All Ghosts, this is Maddox. You know the drill. Stick to the plan. Watch each other's backs. See you on the other side. The engines roared to life. One by one, the jets taxied to the runway, afterburners lighting up the darkness. Evie's heart hammered in her chest as she pushed the throttle forward and felt the G's press her into the seat. The ground fell away, and the squadron soared into the night sky. They flew low, hugging the terrain to avoid radar, weaving through valleys and skimming over rivers. The world outside was a blur: fields, forests, the occasional flicker of distant fires. The radio was mostly silent, each pilot focused on the route, eyes scanning for threats. Evie flew in the middle of the formation, Vega on her left, Harper on her right. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, a silent trust forged through months of training and 1,000 shared dangers. As they crossed the border, the tension ratcheted up. Enemy radar swept the sky, searching for intruders. The Ghosts dropped lower, almost skimming the treetops. Evie's breath fogged her mask as she focused on her instruments. Every muscle taut. The first SAM site came into view, a cluster of vehicles and radar dishes nestled in a clearing. Maddox's voice was calm. Ghost 3 and 4, take the shot. Missiles streaked from the jets, slamming into the site in a blossom of fire. Alarms blared as enemy searchlights swept the sky. The Ghosts punched through, flares blooming behind them as they dodged the first wave of anti-aircraft fire. Keep moving, Vega shouted. Don't let them lock on. Evie jinked left, then right, her jet shuddering as shrapnel rattled off. The fuselage. She glanced at her wing. Harper was still there, face grim behind her visor. The radio crackled with static, then a scream. I'm hit. Losing fuel. Can't hold altitude. Ghost 4's jet spiraled down, smoke pouring from the engine. Evie watched in horror as the pilot ejected, parachute blooming in the darkness. There was no time to mourn. Enemy fighters were inbound, closing fast. Bandits, 3 o'clock, Vega called. Weapons hot. The sky erupted into chaos. Missiles streaked. Jets twisted and rolled, tracers cutting through the night. Evie locked onto a target, fired, and watched the enemy jet explode in a ball of flame. She dodged another missile by inches, the warning sirens shrieking in her ears. The supply depot loomed ahead, a maze of fuel tanks, trucks, and warehouses ringed by searchlights and anti-aircraft guns. The ghosts split into pairs, each assigned a sector. Evie's hands were steady as she armed her bombs, lined up the target, and dove. Flak burst around her, the sky alive with fire. She released her payload, pulled up hard, and watched as the depot erupted in a chain of explosions. Direct hit. Vega shouted, "Pull out! Pull out!" But the enemy was waiting. As the ghosts turned for home, a wall of S-aims rose to meet them. Harper's jet took a hit, spiraling down in flames. Maddox's voice was grim. "Keep moving. Don't look back." Evie's jet shuddered as shrapnel tore through the wing. Warning lights flashed, hydraulics failing, fuel leaking, systems degrading. She gritted her teeth, coaxing the wounded bird through the gauntlet. The squadron was down to 3, Maddox, Vega, and Evie. The radio was a litany of losses, static, and desperate calls for help. Maddox's jet was trailing smoke. Vega's systems were glitching, and Evie's own controls were sluggish. They flew low, dodging enemy patrols, nursing their crippled jets toward the border. Maddox's voice was weak. "If I don't make it, you two keep going." Evie fought to keep her jet in the air, sweat pouring down her face. She glanced at Vega, saw the fear in his eyes, the determination in his jaw. Suddenly, Maddox's jet lurched, engine coughing. "I'm losing power. Can't hold altitude." "Bail out, sir," Vega shouted. Maddox's voice was calm. "You two make it home. That's an order." His jet vanished into the trees, a fireball lighting up the night. Evie swallowed hard, grief and adrenaline warring inside her. She focused on the horizon, the faint glow of home just visible in the distant dot as they neared the border. Enemy fighters appeared. 2, then 4. Evie and Vega were outnumbered, outgunned, and running on fumes. Vega's voice was tight. "We make our stand here." They fought with everything they had, guns blazing, missiles flying, flares streaking through the sky. Evie locked onto a target, fired, watched the enemy jet explode. Another dove on her, guns chattering. She rolled, dove, pulled up, felt the G's crush her into the seat. Vega took out another, but his jet was hit. "I'm losing control, ejecting." Evie watched as his parachute opened, then vanished into the darkness. She was alone. The last enemy jet closed in, guns blazing. Evie's systems were failing, alarms blaring, fuel almost gone. She remembered her father's words, "Trust your gut. Never give up." She rolled, dove, pulled a maneuver she'd practiced 1,000 times in the simulator. The enemy overshot, and Evie squeezed the trigger. The jet exploded, debris raining down. Evie leveled out, heart pounding. The border was ahead, the runway. A thin line of light in the distance. She called in, voice shaking. "Go 6, inbound. Request emergency landing." The tower replied, disbelief in their voice. "Copy, Go 6. You're the only one." Evie coaxed her wounded jet down, landing hard, skidding to a stop as emergency crews rushed in. She climbed out, legs shaking, tears streaming down her face. The hangar was silent as she walked in, every eye on her. Every pilot, mechanic, and officer staring in awe. Colonel Maddox's empty chair sat at the front. Vega and Harper's names were already being etched onto the memorial wall. Evie stood alone, the last of the ghosts. She had made it back, but at what cost? The hangar was quiet, except for the soft hum of machinery and the distant murmur of voices. Evie Tran stood alone, her flight suit still stained with soot and sweat, the adrenaline fading to a dull ache in her muscles. The cheers and applause that had greeted her landing were gone, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on her chest. She had made it back. The only one. The last of the ghosts. The days after the mission were a wind of debriefings, medical checks, and media attention. Evie answered questions with a calm she didn't feel. careful to honor her fallen comrades, Vega, Harper, Maddox, while deflecting the spotlight. The squadron was fractured. The losses were raw, the grief palpable. Some pilots looked at her with admiration, others with envy or resentment. She was the rookie who had survived, but at what cost? Colonel Maddox's absence was a void that no one could fill. His leadership had been fierce, unyielding, and now it was gone. The squadron's morale wavered, and Evie felt the weight of expectations settle heavily on her shoulders. Evie's nights were restless. She replayed the mission endlessly, the dogfights, the explosions, the moment Maddox's jet disappeared. She thought of Vega's last words, Harper's smile, the empty seats in the mess hall. She struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering why she had been spared when others had not. The question haunted her. Was she truly ready for what lay ahead? Her father visited, quiet and steady as always. He didn't offer easy answers, just presence. You carried them with you, Evie. That's what matters. But presence wasn't enough to quiet the storm inside her. The Air Force brass moved quickly. Evie was promoted, given command of a new squadron, one tasked with training the next generation of pilots for the escalating conflict. Her first order was to visit the families of the fallen. She traveled from city to city, offering condolences, sharing stories, and listening to grief. Each visit was a reminder of the stakes, the cost of war, and the lives behind the mission. She met mothers and fathers, siblings and children, all struggling to understand why their loved ones were gone. Evie carried their pain with her, fueling her resolve. Leading a squadron was a different battle. Evie faced skepticism from officers who doubted her experience, questioned her youth, and challenged her decisions. She learned to navigate politics, manage personalities, and inspire trust. She pushed her pilots hard, demanding excellence, but offering support. She shared her story openly, the failures, the losses, the lessons. She became a mentor, a leader, who understood fear and courage in equal measure. Her squadron began to thrive, earning respect for their skill and discipline. But Evie knew the true test was still ahead. Back at command, Evie worked closely with intelligence analysts. A new threat was emerging, a coordinated enemy offensive targeting multiple fronts. She pored over satellite images, intercepted communications, and human intelligence reports. Patterns emerged. Supply lines stretched thin, enemy morale wavering, but desperation growing. Evie proposed a daring plan, a preemptive strike deep into enemy territory to disrupt their logistics and buy time for coalition forces. The generals debated fiercely. Some called it reckless. Others saw it as the only chance. Evie stood firm. We have to act before they do. Waiting will cost more lives. Her conviction swayed the room. The plan was approved. The squadron trained relentlessly. Evie led simulations, briefed pilots, and coordinated with ground forces. She balanced the technical with the personal, ensuring her pilots were ready mentally and physically. She spent long nights reviewing mission parameters, contingency plans, and escape routes. The weight of command pressed on her, but she welcomed it. Her team was ready. The night before the mission, Evie sat alone in her quarters. She stared at a photo of her father in uniform, the man who had taught her to fly and to fight. She whispered, "I'm ready, Dad. I'll make you proud." But doubt crept in. Could she lead them through the fire? Could she survive what was coming? She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and steeled herself at first light. The squadron assembled on the tarmac. Engines roared to life, and Evie climbed into her jet, heart pounding but focused. The mission was clear. Strike hard, strike fast, and get out. As the jets lifted off into the breaking dawn, Evie felt the weight of every life on her shoulders. The fallen, the living, and those yet to come. The battle was about to begin. The sky was bruised with the colors of war smoke curling on the horizon. dawn bleeding through the clouds. Evie stood at the head of her squadron, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who now looked to her for guidance. Her new squadron was a patchwork of experience, a handful of seasoned veterans, a core of eager but untested rookies, and a few transfers still haunted by losses from other units. They had trained hard, but Evie knew that nothing, no simulation, no classroom, could prepare them for what was coming. She looked each pilot in the eye. We fly as one. We watch each other's backs. We come home together. Understood? A chorus of "Yes, ma'am," answered her, some voices strong, others trembling. Evie nodded. Let's get to work. Inside the briefing room, the atmosphere was tense. Maps covered the walls, red markers showing enemy supply lines, blue arrows plotting their own strike. Intelligence had confirmed the enemy was massing for a major offensive. If Evie's squadron could disrupt their logistics, the coalition would have a fighting chance. The plan was audacious. A deep strike on the enemy's forward supply base, supported by ground teams and coordinated with a diversionary attack on another front. Timing was everything. If they hit too early or too late, the enemy would have time to regroup. Evie laid out the plan in detail: approach routes, attack patterns, fallback options. She assigned roles, pairing veterans with rookies, making sure every jet had a wingman. She answered questions, addressed fears, and made it clear: no heroics. We do this together. As the pilots filed out, Evie caught the eye of Lieutenant Park, one of the youngest in the squadron. He looked pale but determined. You ready, Park? She asked. He nodded. I won't let you down, ma'am. Evie smiled. Just fly your mission. That's all I ask. The hours before takeoff crawled by. Evie checked her jet, ran through the pre-flight with her crew chief, and walked the flight line, offering quiet words to each pilot. She saw the nerves, the anticipation, the flicker of doubt in some eyes. She remembered her own first combat mission, the fear, the adrenaline, the way the world narrowed to the cockpit and the sky. She wished she could shield her pilots from what was coming, but she knew that was impossible. She found a quiet corner, pulled out her father's patch, and closed her eyes. Give me strength, she whispered. The squadron launched at dawn. Engines thundering, jets slicing through the morning haze. Evie led the formation, her wingman tight at her side. The radio was alive with calls, check-ins, status reports, the controlled chaos of a unit moving as one. They flew low, hugging the terrain to avoid radar, weaving through valleys and over rivers. The world below was a blur: villages, fields. The occasional flash of enemy movement dot. As they neared the target, the tension spiked. Enemy radars swept the sky, searchlights probing the darkness. Evie's voice was calm as she relayed orders, adjusted formation, and prepared her pilots for the run. On my mark, she said, weapons hot. The supply base came into view, a sprawl of fuel tanks, trucks, and warehouses ringed by anti-aircraft guns. The ground erupted in fire as the squadron dove, missiles and bombs streaking toward their targets. Evie's jet shuddered as flak burst around her. She locked onto a fuel truck, released her payload, and pulled up hard, feeling the G's crush her. Into the seat. Explosions blossomed below, smoke billowing into the sky. Direct hit. Park shouted over the radio. Stay sharp, Evie replied. We're not out yet. Enemy fighters appeared, swooping in from the east. The dogfight was chaos: jets twisting, missiles streaking, flares blooming. Evie's training took over. She dodged a missile, rolled behind an enemy, and squeezed the trigger. The jet exploded in a ball of flame. She scanned the sky her squadron was holding, but not without cost. 2 jets were trailing smoke. Another was missing entirely. Regroup, she ordered. Form up on me. As they turned for home, the radio crackled with distress calls. Lieutenant Park's voice was tight. I'm hit losing fuel. Evie's heart pounded. Hang on, Park. I'm with you. She dropped back, flying wing for wing with Park as his jet limped toward friendly lines. Enemy fighters circled, probing for weakness, but Evie held them off, her own jet battered but flying. One by one, the squadron crossed the border. Emergency crews raced to meet them as they landed, pulling wounded pilots from cockpits, dousing fires, and counting heads. Evie climbed out, legs shaking, adrenaline fading to exhaustion. She looked at her squadron, some battered, some bloodied, all alive, but not all had made it. The missing jet was confirmed down, the pilot's fate unknown. The debrief was somber. Evie reported the losses, the successes, the lessons learned. She praised her pilots, mourned the fallen, and made it clear. We did our job. We made a difference. The brass congratulated her, but Evie felt the weight of every decision, every order, every life. That night, she walked the flight line. Alone, the hangar lights casting long shadows. She thought of Maddox, Vega, Harper, and all the others who had flown before her. She understood now what it meant to lead, to carry the hopes and fears of others, to make impossible choices, to live with the consequences. Evie wrote to the family of the lost pilot. She told the truth of courage, of sacrifice, of the price paid for freedom. She promised to honor their memory, to keep fighting, to never forget. She ended the letter as she always did. We fly together. We come home together. And when we can't, we carry each other in our hearts. The next morning, Evie gathered her squadron. She looked at each pilot, saw the pain and pride in their eyes. We're not done, she said. The enemy will come again, but so will we. We fly for those who can't. We fight for those who wait. And we never, ever give up. The squadron cheered, a sound of hope in a world at war. Evie smiled, her heart heavy but strong. She was no longer the rookie, the outsider, the one who didn't belong. She was the leader, and the sky was calling once more. The weeks after the strike blurred into one another, a relentless cycle of missions, repairs, and sleepless nights. The enemy, stung by the coalition's bold attack, responded with a ferocity Evie's squadron had never seen. Every day brought new threats, radar locks, missile launches, ambush from the ground and sky. The air war was no longer about winning. It was about surviving. Evie felt the pressure in every muscle and bone. She was no longer just a pilot, she was the leader, the strategist, the one who had to keep her people alive. And the cost was mounting. She saw it in her pilot's eyes. Exhaustion, fear, the haunted look of those who had seen too much. Lieutenant Park, once eager and bright, now spoke little, his hands trembling before every sortie. Sergeant Kim, the radar operator, had lost her brother in a ground attack and flew with a silent rage that worried Evie. Even the veterans, those who had survived the ghosts, seemed older, their jokes darker, their silences longer. Evie tried to be everywhere at once, briefing pilots, checking on maintenance crews, poring over intelligence reports. She slept in her flight suit, ate in hurried bites between meetings, and found herself staring at the sky in the small hours, wondering how much more she could give. Her father called whenever he could, his voice steady and warm. "You're doing more than anyone could ask, Evie, but you have to take care of yourself too." She wanted to believe him. But the war didn't wait for anyone to rest. Intelligence reported a new enemy weapon, a mobile SAM battery with advanced targeting, capable of tracking jets at low altitude and striking with terrifying precision. 3 coalition jets had already been lost, their wreckage scattered across the hills. Evie's squadron was tasked with finding and destroying the battery. The mission was as dangerous as any she'd face: fly low, draw fire, and hope to spot. The launch before it was too late. She gathered her pilots in the briefing room, the air thick with tension. "We fly in pairs. No one goes alone. If you see a launch, call it out. Trust your wingman. Park raised his hand, voice barely above a whisper. What if we don't make it back? Evie met his gaze. Then we go together. No one gets left behind. They launched at dawn. The sky streaked with red and gold. Evie flew lead, Park on her wing, Kim and another veteran, Sanchez, covering the flanks. The terrain was rugged hills, forests, narrow valleys where the enemy could hide anything. The radio was tense, every pilot scanning the ground for the telltale flash of a launch. Suddenly, Kim's voice cut through the static. Missile. 2 o'clock low. Evie rolled hard, pulling G's that made her vision blur. The missile streaked past, exploding in a burst of flame. Park called out, I see it. Battery on the ridge. Evie relayed the coordinates, and the squadron dove in, weapons hot. Flak burst around them, the SAM sights spitting missiles like angry bees. Sanchez's jet took a hit, spiraling down into the trees. Kim screamed, Bail out, bail out. Evie locked onto the battery, released her bombs, and pulled up hard. The ridge erupted in fire, the SAM silenced. She circled, searching for Sanchez's chute. Do you see him? Park's voice was shaky. There, north slope. Evie radioed for rescue, then led the squadron home, her hands shaking on the stick. Back at base, the mood was somber. Sanchez was alive, but badly injured. The squadron had survived, but just barely. Evie gathered her pilots, her voice steady but her heart breaking. We did our job. We took out the threat. But we lost another friend. That's the reality of war. We mourn, we remember, and we keep flying for them, for each other. She spent the night in the infirmary, sitting with Sanchez, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. She thought of all the pilots she had known, all the friends she had lost, and wondered how many more would be gone before it was over. The next week brought little relief. The enemy pressed harder, launching night raids and drone attacks. Evie's squadron was stretched to the breaking point, flying 3, sometimes 4 sorties a day. Evie felt herself unraveling. She snapped at her crew, lost her temper in briefings, and found it harder and harder to sleep. She dreamed of fire and falling, of Maddox and Vega and Harper calling her name from the darkness. One night, after a particularly brutal mission, she broke down in her quarters, sobbing into her hands. She felt lost, alone, and utterly exhausted. Not her father called, sensing something was wrong. It's okay to be scared, Evie. It's okay to feel lost. But you're not alone. Lean on your team. Let them help you. She took his advice to heart. The next morning, she called a meeting not as a commander, but as a friend. She spoke honestly about her fears, her doubts, her grief. The squadron listened, and one by one, they shared their own struggles. The mood shifted. The squadron became a family, not just a unit, but a group bound by trust and shared pain. With renewed resolve, Evie led her squadron into the next phase of the war. They adapted, learning to fly smarter, not just harder. They used decoys, electronic warfare, and new tactics to outsmart the enemy. Losses slowed, morale improved, and victories began to stack up. Evie found herself again, not the rookie, not just a survivor, but a leader in every sense. One afternoon, after a successful mission, Park approached her. You saved my life. Out there, ma'am. I wouldn't be here if not for you. Evie smiled, pride and gratitude swelling in her chest. We save each other, Park. That's what makes us strong. Intelligence reported a final enemy push, a massive armored column moving toward the capital. If it broke through, the city would fall. Evie's squadron was chosen to lead the air assault, coordinating with ground forces and allied jets. The plan was risky, the odds long, but Evie felt ready. She briefed her pilots, checked their jet, and took a moment to look at the sky. She thought of everyone she had lost, everyone she still fought for. "We fly as one," she said. "For them, for us, for home." As the squadron launched into the setting sun, Evie knew the endgame was near. But whatever happened next, she was no longer just the pilot who made it back. She was the leader who brought them home. The city's skyline glowed in the distance, a fragile line of light against the encroaching dark. Evie stood at the head of the briefing room, her squadron gathered around her. Maps and satellite images covered the walls, red pins marking enemy. Armor columns, blue lines showing their own battered defenses. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. This was it, the final push. If the enemy broke through, the city would fall. If Evie's squadron could hold them back, there was hope for everyone. General Carter, the coalition's air commander, outlined the stakes. "We have reports of over 100 enemy vehicles, tanks, APCs, mobile SAMs moving fast. The ground. Forces will hold the line, but they need air cover. Your job is to break the spearhead, disrupt the advance, and buy us time for reinforcements." He looked at Evie. "You're the tip of the spear, Captain Tran. I trust your judgment." Evie nodded, feeling the weight of every life in the city pressing on her shoulders. She turned to her pilots, Park, Kim, the new recruits, the veterans, who had become her family. "We fly as one," she said. "We protect each other. We protect the city. No one gets left behind." A murmur of assent rippled through the room. Some pilots gripped their lucky charms. Others closed their eyes in silent prayer. Evie walked the flight line, checking each jet, speaking quietly with the ground crews. She found Park sitting on a wing, staring at the stars. "Nervous?" she asked. He nodded. "I keep thinking about my family. About what happens if we fail." Evie sat beside him. "We won't fail. We can't. But whatever happens, we do this together." He smiled, a little braver. "Thank you, Captain." She squeezed his shoulder. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we make history." The squadron launched at first light, engines roaring, wings slicing through the morning mist. Evie flew lead, her jet bristling with missiles and bombs. The radio was alive with chatterground units reporting enemy movement. Allied jets checking in. The distant rumble of artillery dot as they neared the front. The scale of the battle became clear. Columns of tanks snaked through the valleys, anti-aircraft. Guns bristled on every ridge, and plumes of smoke marked the first clashes between armored units. "Eyes up, everyone," Evie called. SAM's on the ridge, enemy fighters inbound. The first missile streaked past her canopy, a white-hot blur. She rolled, dropped chaff, and dove low, hugging the terrain. Park called out, "Bandits at 9 o'clock." The sky erupted in chaos jets. Twisting, missiles streaking, flak bursting all around. Evie locked onto a tank column, released her bombs, and pulled up hard. Explosions rippled through the enemy ranks. The radio crackled with distress calls. "I'm hit! Ejecting! Mayday! Mayday!" Evie watched as a rookie pilot's jet spiraled down, parachute blooming in the smoke. Kim's voice was tight. "I've got your 6, Captain. Stay with me," Evie replied. "We're not done yet." The enemy was relentless. Mobile SAMs tracked every move. Enemy fighters harried the squadron, and the ground was a maze of fire and steel. Evie's jet took a hit warning, lights blared, hydraulic fluid leaking. She gritted her teeth, coaxing the wounded bird through another attack. "Run! Park, on me!" she shouted. Together, they dove on a convoy, missiles streaking from their wings. The convoy erupted in fire, scattering enemy troops. Reinforcements arrived, coalition jets, attack helicopters, ground units pushing forward. The tide began to turn. Evie's squadron regrouped, battered but unbroken. She called in, voice hoarse. "Target the bridge, cut off their retreat." The squadron formed up, a wall of steel and courage. They dove on the bridge, bombs dropping in perfect sequence. The span collapsed, trapping enemy armor on the wrong side of the river. Cheers erupted. Over the radio, "We did it. The line is holding." But the enemy made one last, desperate push. A wave of tanks and infantry surged toward the city, covered by a barrage of anti-aircraft fire. Evie felt the exhaustion in her bones, the pain of every loss, the hope of every life behind her. She looked at her squadron, some jets trailing. Smoke, some pilots wounded, all of them fighting for home. "We hold the line," she said. One more time. Evie led the last attack, diving through flak and missiles, targeting the enemy command vehicle. Her jet shook with the impact, alarms blaring, but she held steady. "Missile away," she called. The command vehicle exploded. The enemy advance faltered. Park's voice came through, shaky but triumphant. "They're retreating. We did it." Evie pulled up, scanning the battlefield. The enemy was in full retreat, coalition forces advancing. The city was safe. The squadron limped home, jets battered, pilots exhausted. Evie landed last, her jet trailing smoke, her hands trembling. The base erupted in cheers as she climbed out, her squadron rushing to embrace her. Park hugged her, tears streaming down his face. "We made it, Captain. We really made it." Evie smiled through her own tears. "You were brilliant out there, Park. All of you were." General Carter met her on the tarmac, saluting. "You saved the city, Captain Tran. You saved us all." Evie returned the salute, pride and relief flooding. That night, the squadron gathered in the mess hall. They toasted the fallen, celebrated the living, and shared stories of courage and sacrifice. Evie looked around at her pilots, her family, and knew she had found her place. She was no longer the outsider, the rookie, the one who didn't belong. She was the leader who brought them home. But even as the city slept, Evie knew her journey wasn't over. There would be new battles, new challenges, new skies to conquer. For now, though, she allowed herself to rest, surrounded by those who had flown and fought and survived by her side. The city was safe, but the skies still echoed with the memory of battle. Evie Tran stood on the tarmac, the early morning sun glinting off the battered wings of her jet. Around her, the base was alive with the sounds of rebuilding mechanics, repairing aircraft, medics tending to the wounded, and pilots greeting each other with exhausted relief. Evie felt the weight of every mission, every loss, every victory. She was the last of the ghosts, the leader who brought her squadron home, the pilot who made it back when no one else did. But she knew she hadn't done it alone. General Carter called a ceremony on the flight line. Pilots, ground crew, and officers gathered as Carter pinned a medal to Evie's flight suit. His words rang out clear. Courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about flying anyway, especially when the world says you can't. Captain Tran, you showed us all what it means to lead. Evie looked at her squadron, Park, Kim, the new recruits, the veterans who had become her family. She saw pride in their faces, gratitude in their eyes. She saw the empty spaces too, the friends who hadn't made it home. She saluted them all, her voice steady. "We fly for those who can't. We carry them with us every time we take to the sky." In the days that followed, Evie was asked to recount every detail, the tactics, the decisions, the moments when everything hung by a thread. She shared the credit with her team, praised the ground crews, honored the fallen. She was invited to speak at the academy, where young cadets listened, wide-eyed as she described the reality of command, the fear, the doubt, the responsibility. She told them the truth. I was rejected by every squadron. I was told I'd never make it, but I kept showing up. I kept flying, and when it mattered most, I was ready. A cadet raised his hand. "How do you keep going when you're the only one left?" Evie smiled, a little sad, a little proud. "You remember who you fly for. You remember that you're never truly alone. And you trust that every loss, every setback, every no is shaping you for the moment you'll be needed most. News of Evia's survival spread beyond the base. Families of the fallen wrote to thank her for bringing their loved ones home, for telling their stories, for honoring their sacrifice. Young pilots, especially those who felt like outsiders, sent her messages. "You give me hope. They said I wasn't good enough, but now I know I can keep trying." Evie replied, to as many as she could. She encouraged the doubters, the dreamers, the ones who felt invisible. Keep flying. Keep showing up. The world needs you. The war wound down, the front line shifted, and Evia's squadron began to rebuild. She trained new pilots, shared her hard-won lessons, and watched as rookies found their courage. She visited the families of the ghosts, listened to their stories, and promised to remember. She kept a photo of her original squadron on her desk, a reminder of where she'd come from and who she flew for. One evening, as the sun set over the airfield, Evie sat with Park and Kim, sharing coffee and quiet laughter. The sky was peaceful, the base calm. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope for a future beyond war. At the academy, Evie became a mentor. She taught not just flight maneuvers, but resilience. She told cadets, "You'll be doubted. You'll be told no. But if you keep showing up, keep learning, keep flying, you'll be ready when your moment comes." A young woman approached her after a lecture. "They say I'm too small to fly fighters, that I don't fit the mold." Evie smiled. "Neither did I, but the sky doesn't care. Prove them wrong." One night, Evie walked the flight line alone. She paused by her jet, running, her hand along the scarred fuselage. She thought of her father, of Maddox, Vega, Harper, and all the ghost dots. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me. I'll keep flying for you." Evia's journey was never about being the best or the bravest. It was about refusing to let rejection define her. It was about showing up again and again, until the world had no choice but to see her worth. She learned that leadership isn't about rank or reputation. It's about heart, resilience, and the courage to keep going, even when you're the only one left. So, if you've ever been told you're not enough, not ready, or not what they're looking for, remember Evie Tran. Remember that sometimes the ones who are rejected the most are the ones who change everything. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories of ordinary people who did the extraordinary, hit subscribe and join us for the next chapter, because the next hero could be you.